I'm sure you've paid attention to the news for the past couple of weeks and noticed that the Pac-12 added 4 of the Mountain West top schools: Boise State, Fresno State, Colorado State, and San Diego State. This is shown to be a message to the world that the Pac-12 hasn't died just yet, as they are still capable of making big moves. And this has also nullified one of my more recent videos regarding the Mountain West. So I thought today I'd kind of make somewhat of a counter to that. I'm sure that nobody else will do anything similar, I'm just sure of it. So what can the Pac-12 do to ensure its survival? This isn't about rumors, this is just me simply asking which moves could the Pac-12 theoretically make to ensure its survival. So let's get right into it. Disclaimer, since this is all ongoing stuff, by the time you see this conference could have already added some of these teams that I'm going to talk about. So even if this has already happened, just see this as what else they can do. The first solution is still a merger with the Mountain West, and I'll still play off of the idea that I kind of had in my Mountain West video, just instead the Pac-12 retains the name instead. So if you want to hear more about that, then go watch it. But the idea is that the two conferences essentially merge. Before, I thought that the Pac-12 name and brand wasn't really powerful enough to convince anybody to leave a much larger conference. I was wrong. This would also be incredibly ideal right now, as each of the 4 Mountain West schools would have to pay $17 million to leave, while the Pac-12 has to pay an additional $10 million per team added because of the agreement with the Mountain West. So if there is some sort of deal struck involving a merger, then nobody has to pay anybody while the Mountain West keeps their teams. And then the new Pac-12 would be born. But this isn't without any problems. The first problem is with what's going on right now. The Mountain West would receive $108 million in total, so the Mountain West would have a hard decision to make. Earn over $100 million but lose your best teams, or keep your teams but lose your brand. That might honestly be a rough decision to make. The second problem is that not every team in the Mountain West is worthy of being in a conference competing for power status. You have the Big Four that definitely could, then you have a few other schools that could definitely make their case, such as UNLV, who has a really strong brand, especially with recent football success. Utah State won its first NCAA tournament game last year, and still has a sometimes competitive football team. Wyoming and Air Force have mostly been at a competitive level for periods of time as well. There's also New Mexico and Nevada, who the Pac-12 wouldn't pursue on their own, but if they absolutely had to come along, then they wouldn't hurt the Pac-12 too much. But Hawaii and San Jose State are just too small of programs to really be profitable members, especially when you consider all of the stadium problems that Hawaii has had in recent memory, and of course the fact that they are thousands of miles away from the nearest other stadium. So this all leaves the question, if the Pac-12 wants some more of these Mountain West teams, is it worth it to pick up some of the less competitive teams, such as Hawaii and San Jose State? And while all of the other schools may eventually make their cases as power schools with enough time, is it worth it to have these schools too? Again, the Pac-12 is trying to make their case as a power conference here. But this is also assuming that the Pac-12 can't just cut them off. I don't think they can. I'd assume there would be some sort of binding contract here, but at the same time, I was already wrong once in this video. So as you can see, the question of a merger might not be so simple. I personally think that it would be mutually beneficial, as $100 million can only last a college conference so long these days. But what do I know? So let's move on to a different idea, without thinking about any further implications. Which would be the best individual schools in general to add to get the Pac-12 back up to, let's say, 12 competitive teams, while still making their case as a power conference? So far they have Washington State, Oregon State, Boise State, Fresno State, Colorado State, and San Diego State, bolstering the conference up to 6 teams. But if they had to choose anybody else, which schools would they go for first? As I mentioned before, they still may need a couple more Mountain West teams, so I'm going to make individual cases for my first 4 teams. UNLV, Wyoming, Utah State, and Air Force. Now, that would leave the Mountain West with only 4 teams left, but we're not really worried about them, are we? They'll be fine. I'm sure of it. So let's look at our options one by one. First is UNLV. Now, they have a lot going for them. So much so that they should be target number 1. First is their football program, which has been looking up for the past couple of years. They were competitive last year, where they finished 9-5 and lost the conference championship for the Mountain West. And this year, as of the beginning of week 4, they are 3-0 to start, with 2 of their wins coming against Power 5 teams. And they have a decent schedule during the rest of their season, as they still have to play Syracuse, Boise, Fresno, and Oregon State. If they can win 3 of those games, they may be ranked by the end of the year. And look at their stadium, which just hosted the Super Bowl. After last year, their sports programs generated $17 million in revenue, which is only ranked 79th, but also grew 30% in the past year and exceeds that of Fresno. This team has a storied basketball program, which is the 5th best all time in terms of record. Finally, this team is the only one based in the Las Vegas metro area, the 29th largest in the country at 2.3 million. And this metro is among the fastest growing in the country as well. When looking at programs, this team is a must add, as I can't really see any major reason why they can't be added other than the state government potentially trying to tie in Nevada with them. But when do those stunts ever work out? Next is Wyoming. They aren't as much of a lock as Las Vegas, but they do have some benefits. First, they are the only Division I college in Wyoming, which is the smallest state in the country, but still could mean something. They do rank among the highest group of 5 schools in terms of revenue, being just under that of Las Vegas at 80th. Their football team has had recent success, finishing at 9-4 last year and winning the Arizona Bowl. They have also produced Josh Allen, one of the best QBs in the NFL right now, if nothing else. Their basketball program did make the NCAA tournament last year, so they wouldn't be a football-only school. They also have a sizable stadium with a capacity of 30,000. So although they wouldn't be as good of an ad as Vegas, they still wouldn't be a terrible bet, especially since they've always played in similar leagues as the 4 schools that recently moved as well. We also have Utah, State, and Air Force, who are more of the same in terms of resume. And honestly, they have similar stats to Wyoming, the difference being that they're from more populated areas. They made it 2 bowls last year, having 6-7 and 9-4 records. Their stadiums are 25,000 and 45,000 respectively. In basketball, Utah State advanced to the 2nd round last year while maintaining an athletic revenue of $15 million. Meanwhile, Air Force has an estimated revenue of $25 million. However, this is from a different source, so I'm not sure how reliable it is. And they're also the only FBS school in the Colorado Springs metro, making Air Force the likely better option. However, neither of these two wouldn't be as solid as Las Vegas or Wyoming in my opinion. But if the Pac-12 needs to break 8 teams, as that is the amount an FBS conference is supposed to have according to the NCAA, then they'll have to do. And don't worry about Air Force talks with the American. If the Pac-12 has enough pulling power to do what they just did, then convincing Air Force will be no problem. So that's everything really with the Mountain West. In summary, a merger would probably be the most beneficial, but there are downsides there too. And if the Pac-12 wants anybody else from this conference, then they almost have to head to Vegas, as that is their absolute best bet, no pun intended. After that, their priorities should go down to Wyoming, then Air Force, and finally Utah State in that order. I don't see any of the other teams in the Mountain West being helpful on their own, but if there is a merger, then they wouldn't be the worst teams to have. Except, of course, Hawaii. Now that we're done with the Mountain West, let's move on to the other conferences. But before I do that, just know that if you subscribe right now, then you will have a constant stream of college football content for the rest of the season. Anyway, where were we at? Oh yeah, the ACC. Now this conference has a very questionable future, and I really could spin the rumor mill with this one. But I don't really care about most of their teams, as we're only really looking at two, Stanford and Cal. Now you may be thinking, well, Mr. Crispy Maps, they just left the Pac-12. Why would they come back? And then, my dear viewer, I will simply say this. They panicked. Honestly, do you think that this would actually work? Now, geography might not play as much of a role as it used to, but tell me this, and I have made this argument in the Mountain West video too. Do you think student athletes from two of the most academically prestigious schools in the country are going to enjoy flying across the country potentially several times a week and dealing with a potential gauntlet of a school schedule? No. Do you think that these two schools are going to want to pour nearly as much money into sports as the LA schools or Oregon or Washington in terms of travel costs? No. So is staying in the ACC a viable long-term option? No. Will they end up entering the Big Ten at some point so they could play more Western schools? Probably not. The only reason, and I mean the only reason they moved, was because they thought they had to in order to retain power status. And no matter what happens to the ACC, this is not a viable long-term solution. So if a newly bolstered Pac-12 decides to reappear, they probably won't have to do much convincing to re-add Stanford and Cal. Maybe I'm wrong about all of this, and I'm not saying that these schools are going to be begging to be added back, but at the same time, it might still be those schools' best option. So right next to Las Vegas should be Stanford and Cal Berkeley, because they are still 100% in their reach. Now we have 12 schools, but what if they can't secure any of these schools? It seems that we've reached a crossroads. For most of this video, I've been adhering slightly to geography, as the furthest east school I've mentioned is Air Force in Colorado, and if the Pac-12 wants to keep itself in the realm of reason in terms of expansion, then they aren't going to have many options. In fact, I only have one more school that may be considered west of the Rockies, Gonzaga. Now this would be a slam dunk in every single sport but football. But the honest truth is that the only sport that really does matter in terms of revenue is football. And that is something that hurts Gonzaga. As, although having a nationally renowned basketball team is nice, that doesn't help Gonzaga's case nearly as much as the lack of football hurts them. So what if we expand the geographical barrier past the next row of states? What would be the new best option? Now, I'm not going further than that because, Memphis is too far away. But even with that newly expanded states, the choices are amazing. So let's break everything down. You have SMU if something does happen to the ACC, but we can't depend on what happens to other conferences, so the best option would probably be UTSA, who is comparable in revenue to Fresno State with a ranking of 81, is very competitive in football, and plays at a large stadium. But we can't just add one school all the way in Texas, so let's give UTSA a partner. But even with the expanded striking distance, looking at any other schools is just So let's break it down. New Mexico State is just too small. If we wanted them, we'd just take New Mexico proper. Texas State could be a very interesting add, as they definitely are trending up, but they still seem to be too small at the moment. The same goes for North Texas and UTEP, who are both trending up but also just seem too small. We have Tulsa, who has been a member of the American for several years now, but they aren't really competitive in, anything. There is Rice, who would honestly be perfect for the Pac-12 if they still cared about academic standards, but they also aren't really too competitive in anything, but not nearly as bad as Tulsa. Sam Houston literally just joined the FBS. Wichita State is another Gonzaga situation. We could also look at the Dakota schools and grab them, because maybe North Dakota State University and South Dakota State University could leapfrog the group of 5, but that's just not feasible. While I do think that these schools could be competitive at the FBS level from year 1, they won't be that good to where they could be in a power conference immediately. So who out of all of these options would I pick? I'd probably go with UTSA and Rice. And if North Texas and Texas State continue their upward trajectory, I'd pick them after a few years. So let's make a final 14-team Pac-12 conference, assuming every team they go after accepts. They'd have the 2 initial members of Oregon State and Washington State, the 4 new members of Boise State, San Diego State, Fresno State, and Colorado State. Then UNLV, Wyoming, Air Force, and Utah State would join as initial members. Stanford and Cal Berkeley would come back, and they reach towards Texas and acquire UTSA and Rice, forming the new Pac-12. Would adding these schools be feasible? Is this a good survival guide for the conference? Is there any teams I missed? Please engage in the comments below, and thank you very much for watching. Now have a great day.